Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. My name is Pilar and with me today is co-host Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Pilar. Hello, everybody.
And this is, I think it's episode 336. Wow. And it's the first of our new What's Going On format. So we do like experimenting. So I think this is and this is a little bit the topic of today's episode as well. So it goes very well hand in hand. But regular listeners, if you've been listening for a while, you know that the What's Going On episodes are episodes where Maya and myself pick a couple of headlines, sometimes a handful of them, and we talk about what's been going on. And we're kind of going to continue doing more or less the same thing, but we're going to link our conversation to the previous episode, probably, which means the episode with a guest for the month. So we're now recording on the 22nd of August, 2023. The previous episode will have been an episode with a really, really lovely guest who actually, Maya, I don't know, I met him in person at a conference.
Wow.
Yes. And as he was giving his speech, I was like, this will be great if he can come and tell us just this, but on the show. And he was very, very open to that. So that's Jan Nieuweboer, who is with Rabobank. He is the spokesperson for Future for Work and hybrid working there. And listeners, if you listen to that, you will know it was more than about hybrid work. So we're going to just pick up on their experimentation, and I think more on how organizations are going about designing how they're going to work for the next X years. So we've had so much about hybrid and so many news about whether people are being forced into the office or not, that we thought, let's leave that to one side and let's focus on other stuff. What did you think overall of the conversation, Maya? Just as a quick touching base with customers. I was going to say with listeners.
Listeners, yeah. I really enjoyed it, and I do encourage anybody who needs a refresher to pause and go and have a listen to it if you haven't already, because I found it quite uplifting, actually. There's been a lot of negative stuff about people not having choices about where to work over this summer. And I thought that the approach by Rabobank was quite encouraging and positive, and there's lots that people can take from it for their own organizations and experiences, whatever kind of size of team or organization or industry you're in.
Yeah. What I really liked about that as well is the fact that Rabobank was one of those organizations, like quite a few others, that were already thinking about how they were going to move forward over the next X amount of years. And I think that really has made a difference in going forward, is whether the organization was already thinking about introducing a more flexible approach, a more location-independent kind of approach, or whether actually the pandemic hit and suddenly, having not even thought about this before, suddenly people realized that they could work from somewhere else, and then they've had to almost catch up.
Yeah, it really does show. I think this is probably going to be one of the critical differentiators over the next few years, is emerging where, not so much if you had a plan, but if you had a culture of change and being alert to change. It's a bit like all the government inquiries going on about the same event of the pandemic preparedness. They might not have known what was coming, but some places were clearly better prepared to cope with some unexpected black swan event that could turn lives upside down, and some governments weren't. That's going to show in organizations as well. So clearly the fact that they already had this team, they already had this position, they already had somebody with an eye on the horizon and the possibilities, I'm sure that made a huge difference.
Yeah, and it made me think of, I worked with the Open University of Catalonia just during the lockdown, and they already had been for a couple of years. They go, okay, how do we move this forward? And also, listeners, if you are interested in these kind of case studies, then Barnett Waddingham, it's a firm in the UK with about 1,500 employees. They also were looking already at a new model of work, and they took the pandemic as an accelerator. So that's episode 304. And also, well, maybe I can tell listeners as well, Maya, that for the Rabobank episode and this one, I really embraced my artificial intelligence buddy, two of them, in fact, GPT-4 and also Claude. And I put the transcript through one of them or both of them. I think it was Claude, actually. And it gave me some show notes, which are okay. Listeners, you can go and look at them in the website. And also I did ask for it to analyze some of the themes to give us some ideas of what we might talk about today, because I always think we could go in so many directions, and it was nice to do that. And first, it gave me lots of how-tos. So, you can talk about how organizations can do this and that. And then I asked it to give me some more high-level stuff. And it did. And I think that for me it's the first time I really used technology to help me through the podcast in this way.
Interesting. I've not used it in that way. It's just so fascinating. All these conversations around AI are about, I tried this and I tried that, and finding these new ideas. For show notes, definitely. Yes. Just the automated thing in Buzzsprout it gives me a really good first draft now. It's not a final draft, but I love how it picks out things that maybe you didn't pay attention to, because inevitably you have your own perspective on an interview and your confirmation bias and everything else, and you might miss whole important themes that it happens to pick up on. Oh, actually, yes, that was quite important. So I thought it was a fascinating use case that you did for this conversation.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of it that way. So one of the things it did, this was my long preamble to one of the things it picked up on was managing the change through a crisis versus incremental change. And this is what we are talking about. And what were your thoughts on this, Maya? So this whole managing, we know change through a crisis is very different to this more deliberate incremental change.
Or more kind of intentional change, I guess, because it's a bit like what you were saying before, the fact that this bank already had a department and a thought leader. Just looking at future changes puts them in a different position to people who were purely reactive in March 2020. And obviously the way that different organizations handled that response varied a great deal, but they're all still part of a process of change as well. It's not like they did one thing that week. And there should be learning, there should be iteration, there should be, all right, well, how did that go? Maybe not so well. Maybe we have to save face and pretend it went well in some organizations. Yes. Maybe we can actually honestly admit that something was not a successful direction and completely pivot. Maybe we just change course slightly. Maybe we consult, we do different things. And I think, the conversation with Rabobank really illustrated that you can learn so much from observing the effects of change. And as well as talking to people about it, both what they say and what they do can inform what you do next. So it doesn't matter whether that change was triggered by something you expected or not, really. It's what you do with it after, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I think that's such a great point about not just going by what people are saying, but what they are doing. And Rabobank was in a great position, as well as a large organization with resources and, of course, a culture. They used to be a cooperative, so this kind of a flat hierarchy, and obviously a culture of experimentation as well, that they were able to say, it is going to be worth it for us to experiment. And by that, they mean, if you go back to, I love the example. I'm in two minds. I don't want to spoil it for the people who haven't listened to it yet, but I think we
spoilers.
Might. Yeah, but so people, if you don't want to listen to this, just fast forward a few minutes. But I think it's worth picking up on the very deliberate way in which they experimented with going back to the office. And instead of saying, let's just all come back and see how it goes, they said, right, let's see what the difference is between people coming back to the office as it was before the pandemic, and what if they come back to something new and different? What is going to happen? And that's what they did.
Yeah, brilliant. I wonder how people felt the minute they came in.
Yes. and how they felt, the people who were going back to how the building as it was, having experienced all these other things, having had all of these conversations. And they went to prove that if you want people to act differently, which we want now, we need to give them a different environment. If we're going to ask people to come back into the office and embrace new ways of working, which is really more in Rabobank about digital first as well. It's not really about working from home as such. It's about using technology in a way that supports their work. So if we want people to do that, and we'd like them for certain reasons to come back into the office, we've got to give them an environment that is going to help them with that.
Yeah, and give them something new, something that shows that where we recognize that a permanent change has happened. Return to office can't be about nostalgia and return to 2019. It's about this shift has occurred. So what do we need now? What will support what we've learned, what we've experienced, the way people have changed? And I thought there was something really refreshing the way it sounds like they made, not that they welcomed this, obviously nobody welcomed the pandemic, but some people clearly saw it as something that to be overcome and absorbed and got back to normal as quickly as possible. And this is the other end of that spectrum of, okay, we've got this amazing opportunity, this amazing social experiment in front of us. Let's see what we can do with that. And we're not trying to conduct something in experimental conditions where we just change one variable and measure and things like that. We're actually just trying to make it as good as we can. We're just trying to fix as many things now as are on the table and see what works. And that seems to have been the mindset behind the methodology, and the results seem really interesting.
And I wonder if, and this I'm just thinking out loud, is, when the pandemic for a lot of reasons was very difficult and emotionally very difficult. And then at one point it just seemed like things were going to move forwards very quickly. And in fact, I think that people in organizations are still, it's still hanging over us a lot of what happened. And I wonder whether experimenting and easing into it and acknowledging, like you said, that we want to do something different, that something's happened and things are not like they were before. So let's work through it together in these different ways. I wonder whether emotionally, even having that sense that the organization is acknowledging that, whether that also helped people. I'm just hypothesizing.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that plays into it, especially in an organization as hierarchical as a bank that's been around for decades. And you might expect there'd be quite a hierarchical top-down kind of approach to decision-making in that environment. And that some people would be attracted to working in an environment where someone's going to come along and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to fix things, and so on. And instead, it's quite courageous to say, well, we're going to try this. We're going to see what happens. We're going to ask you what you think. We're going to maybe change some things we didn't need to change about the office space itself, that we could have just kept it the same, but instead we recognize there's a chance to switch that up too. And yeah, it seems to me that that's quite brave. There's quite a lot of humility there and a lot of trust as well.
And Jan saying how very deliberately they said, and we're going to give you guidelines. We're not going to give you mandates. We're going to give you guidelines, and we're going to support you.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you sure he's from a bank?
Oh, he's Dutch. Let's face it.
Fair enough.
So in this, I something I found very interesting, and I wonder, I'm sure more organizations are doing this than we hear from, because I'm sure lots of organizations are doing really fantastic things, but they just don't have time to talk about it or share as much as we'd like them to. What I liked about this was that as much focus was put on, okay, if we're going hybrid, we have to really understand what happens in the office and how, and the relationship of individuals with their buildings, as well as all the focus that is on where else are they going to work from? Are they going to work from home? How are we going to support them, etc.? And I think this is a really interesting time to be talking about that as well, because the focus has been so much on not going back into the office that I'm missing sometimes understanding how our relationship to the building is being built upon. I don't know. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I mean, the whole idea of designing workspaces has been so important for years, and people have invested so much, and things like the Apple and Google buildings and things like that, campuses, and ways to try and keep people on site at all times and provide for their every need, or make them bump into each other on the way to the loo, or whatever. This, expensive experiments have happened about the space. And now it seems to me that it's quite challenging to say, all right, well, we're going to try and optimize for something else. And ideally, it's not about bringing people here to do the work, but it's about bringing them in for different kinds of connection and collaboration and supporting those weak ties. And they can actually do the work stuff at home. That's quite a big thing to flip on its head, and it's throwing out a lot of bathwater. So I think for a lot of organizations who've maybe committed to these enormous investments over the years, not just in actual real estate, but in the designing of it, that must be quite scary. Yeah,
because it is... Because we still haven't cracked it.
No, not by any means. But we haven't got good digital alternatives either. You can spend millions, billions designing your new campus, but then when it comes to online, it's like, well, Zoom or Teams.
Yes. That's true. That's really true. And actually, you could argue that, I'm going to now contradict myself a little bit in my point of view, but you could argue that so much money is being spent in the physical workspace and making sure we're getting that. And on the other hand, people are just asking to move into Teams without really knowing, because for all the for all the benefits of having one login under a whole Microsoft ecosystem, which I think is something that many people are very, very grateful for, we still don't know how that suite works. We still haven't cracked it. And I'm still not convinced. There's a lot of stuff there that I'm just going to go back on myself a bit, because I'm thinking when you go into a building and the building's designed for you, you don't get the real estate or the people who sold you the building coming in every 2 months and changing things for you. No. And deciding that this is how you're going to work. But in the Microsoft suite, like in many other softwares, you do.
Yeah, and also those building designers don't get constant data back about how you're using the space. Or is this landing popular? Do people hang out in this meeting room or not? Or they don't like it, or they don't like the lighting in the bathrooms or something, whereas all of that digitally is data that is used to constantly optimize. So yeah, we were kind of stuck with our offices, I suppose. That's why it sounds exciting that a bank's experimenting with different seating, just because it's like, wow, you can change things in the physical office, you can mix things up. That sounds overwhelmingly radical. Whereas when it comes to our software environments, we're used to logging in and, oh, this is different. Like we were saying today about this recording software, where have they hidden that thing?
Yes.
But we expect that to happen. We recognize that even though you're paying for it, somebody else is controlling it and designing it.
Yeah, so I don't know, I might go back on myself. Maybe we should keep putting more emphasis and resources into shaping the digital environment. But thinking back, so I've got, I think I said to you, I read a book called The Shaping of Us, How Everyday Spaces Structure Our Lives, Behavior and Well-Being. And it's a really lovely book because I don't know anything about this kind of stuff. So it's by Lily Bernheimer. And it did have, I went back to my notes on it, I didn't reread it. And it had this quote, "We are shaped by our homes, cities, and workspaces, but we have lost the agency we once had in shaping these spaces." And I have to say that with something like Rabobank, where even if people were asked how they felt in the different spaces and stuff and consulted in that way, but even if they hadn't, at least they were part of the methodology that went behind then.
Yeah, just feeling like you have agency, that you've been consulted maybe can actually give you more of a sense of ownership of a space and that it's yours, that you're welcome in it. Quite apart from the effect of the qualities of the space itself, that's how you relate to it. I'm reminded, and this is a rambly aside, so I haven't pulled out any references or anything, but a talk that I heard at a conference last year. It was from an architect, and she was talking in the context of work from anywhere and choosing where to do different kinds of work. But the title of the talk was, oh gosh, I'm going to get this wrong now. It was something like how what we design designs us back. And the talk was along the themes of if you want to do certain kinds of very creative thinking, then you might be better in an environment with a very high ceiling or very high windows and light above you. Whereas if you want to do something quite analytical, then you're better without a horizon in the distance, and you're better in a more enclosed space and so on. Some of it was obvious stuff about distraction and visual clutter, but other things about the headroom and where the light is coming from in the room, I thought were quite interesting. And these are things that maybe, when they're designing the $1 billion Apple complex, they really think these things through. Most of us probably don't in our home offices. We think, I like that plant, so I'll put that there. And that's also good because it's your space and your plant and your mood and everything else. But maybe we all need to learn more. If we're going to, do we have to add this to our remote work to-do list of things to be intentional about, like our exercise and our social life? But maybe there is more effect from our physical environment than we realize, and we should try to be more conscious of it and change it. Or maybe we can trust our instincts and decide that so long as the spare room's got a decent ergonomic chair, it's okay. I don't know.
Well, what's interesting is the interplay between all of those things. So maybe we don't have that much stuff we can change in our home if we're working from home and also using the office, but maybe the office is where we find the space for certain, it's a whole activity-based working as well. It's and how much can we decide what we use and how much input can we have into the designs and how much help do we need to redesign another space like our work, like our home office if we have one. It's this,
and even Rabobank was saying that there were people who were coming into the office to do office things. They were like, no, that's not what we meant. But that means people want it. Some people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off, I think.
No, I was just going to say some people want that some of the time. Does that mean that they haven't, that space in the office or in the building where their old office used to be is still somewhere that they emotionally associate with that? Or is it better optimized in terms of the environment or the lighting or other inputs? Or is it just habit? I don't know.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It can go so deep. So this this is another point. Using the physical workspace design as an agent of change. Again, it's how do we help people change? We change the environment around them. It's very difficult for those people who had to go back to the same physical environment with, as you say, all these emotional connections, all these habits embedded in it, and then being asked to change how they use it or have tried to because they. So I think this is really it's really important. Another note that I saw from this book was about the Hawthorne effect, which was this experiment they did some time ago when I think they were testing, was it the quality of the lighting? They were testing in a factory on productivity. And basically, at the end, they find out that actually the physical conditions weren't as important as the fact that the people in the experiment were feeling observed. Oh. And so productivity had risen. And we're talking like old experiment here.
Yeah.
And I was thinking when I was reading that, going back to another of the suggestions from our friend Claude about rethinking productivity in the future of work, is that the Hawthorne effect has always been very strong, and we know that. And I go to Pilates classes, and I work a lot harder than if I try and do it at home because she's watching me. Uh-huh. And I'm thinking, but people when they work from home, they also work very hard. So, so is it in certain conditions that it? I don't know when is it stronger, this effect?
I don't know. Maybe it's the reason that you're being observed and your relationship to the observer.
Yeah.
I don't know, because if you're taking part in some kind of pilot scheme, I'm thinking back to the olden days when remote working used to be something that was sort of tested and piloted and implemented, and people wanted to be on those pilots if they were in favor of working from home and they had an opinion about it. And, there was a sense of we want this to work. That must affect things too. And also there's a kind of a deceptive element of the technology, not necessarily deceptive, but hidden, that people actually don't know. I mean, the Hawthorne effect ought to be strongest when you're using something like Microsoft Teams, for example, because you know that every time you're in and out of an app within that suite, there's data being piled up somewhere. But it's just data. And you know that your sysadmin might know that this meeting room was very popular at this time of day or something, but it's unlikely that your manager's going to know that you were always lingering in this app or whatever might be held against you or used in evidence. So it's a case of how you expect that observation to be used and what it might change. I don't know if there's a sense of I have to be more productive because I'm part of this wonderful experiment, or because I really want this change to be permanent, or I really want this upstart consultant to fall on their face because this is a rubbish idea. I don't know if it could be a positive or a negative effect, but either way, it's a confounding effect that maybe needs to be taken into consideration more. But we have so much tracking now, we have so much data that maybe the human observation effect is disproportionate for what it is, because that's going to be much more instinctive or anecdotal. This person seems to be more productive than that one, whereas actually we can probably just measure it.
Yeah. And also I wonder whether there's something like, especially knowledge work has moved on onto this whole purpose-driven work and the fact that we feel connected to others and sense of belonging and whatever, and whether actually all of that is more of a driver than the feeling that someone is either observing how well we're doing, or whether someone is observing us and therefore we want to show our best. I don't know. I think it'd be interesting to revisit that.
Yes, and to do it, kind of observe the data rather than conduct an experiment, in a sense that we're not going to engineer another pandemic to see how it goes, but we're also, it's kind of almost, it's not that it's meaningless to create special conditions, but the world doesn't usually work like that. It's more likely that it's some kind of combination of natural circumstances will create whatever change is going to happen. So we need to have ways of measuring for that as well, and also realizing that what's going to happen once the observers aren't there, how much of this might have a performative edge and how much of it is just how people do things anyway, and what's really being measured. Are people, it's like the horrible inevitable conclusion of mouse jigglers from people who have sort of time tracking software installed by their boss, and then they leave something to jiggle their keyboard or their mouse while they go to the loo or go to the pub or whatever. And it's, this is, once you end up with the perverse incentives of measuring the wrong things, then nobody wins. So I don't know. I like the way Rabobank did it. Well, let's actually talk to people and see what they think they want, and then see what they do, and then explore the difference between those things and try and come up with better guidelines for next time.
Yeah. I'm wondering as well how you're going to measure productivity. Like I'm sure after the organizations have done the hybrid setup, whether it's office-centric or remote-centric, for a while, that they're going to try and measure how productive people are in the different spaces. When you can't unlink one from the other, because the fact that, I don't know, I might go into the office one day a week and just chat to people all day, that actually might have all sorts of benefits that then affects my productivity when I'm away from those people.
And there's no point measuring what happens on that day.
Yeah.
If that's what you need as part of your pattern, that you need to have this many kinds of conversations of a certain type with a certain group of people, then I don't know, to just try and measure productivity over a month. What are we measuring anyway in knowledge work or relationship work? So I think that's probably the root of the problem, is coming out of the tech industry of the last 10 years of trying to stick KPIs on things that are actually very hard to quantify anyway.
Yeah, so all of that. So that's Oh, that is great. This all gives us lots to think about and lots of questions. By the way, listeners, if you have anything to add to the conversation, you can email me, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com, or we have a contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. We'd love to hear what you think. There's one more thing I wanted to bring up, which was the next stage. So what I really liked as well about talking to Jan is that it really felt like it's a continuous, okay, what's next? Which, I mean, you don't always want to be innovating in the workplace all the time and changing all the time because you can get change fatigue. But given what's going on, then, and the fact that, well, just given what's going on and the way that things continue to change around us, and the fact that we need to get to the next bit of work life, whatever that is. I hope it's a bit more stable. But he's really thinking, okay, what's next? What do we need to be doing next to support our people? And of course, he started to talk about fostering those networks, those internal networks, and how to make sure actually that people stay connected, even if they're not all going into the same building.
Yeah, I thought that was lovely. And the fact that they're actually engaging community managers to manage that relationship across the network, wherever people are. I thought that was lovely, and particularly recognizing as well that the cultures are different in different offices, different countries, and that they need different kinds of nurturing and support to make those teams work effectively in hybrid or remote. So it was really clear that, I don't know, whatever the future brings, I think Rabobank will figure a way through it from a team point of view. They seem to be really looking at all the possibilities and all the things that could happen, and just trying to build resilience ahead of whatever that is.
I think, well, there's lots of things in what you said. One is the fact that they're really positioning themselves as an employer of choice through the flexibility and the fact that they, and in his words, that they're treating adults like adults when it comes to where they're working from. And then the other thing is this very deliberate, again, and this I'm hoping, and I'm already starting to hear a bit more of this, so I'm hoping this is the next stage in organizations, is this understanding that if we want people to have, if we want our internal networks to be strong, we don't do this by bringing people into the office for a social once a month. That actually takes a lot more intentionality. It takes someone looking after it, like you said, the community manager. And this, I mean, this is not new, because of course we had Rachel Happy in episode 308 talk about this. We've talked about this before, but I think it's, as organizations are starting to look at how do we work well while we are apart from each other for some time? Okay, how do we provide those internal networks? Right, we need to focus on it. Someone needs to be on top of it. Or we need some kind of infrastructure to it. It's not going to happen by chance.
Yeah, and we have to kind of try and look ahead without the benefit of any kind of predictive technology or crystal balls. But we have to try and imagine what the longer term impacts might be. There was something I read recently, and I didn't put it in the show notes, so I'll find the link later. But it was talking about turnover and organizational turnover and retention, and how that might be impacted by return to office mandates. And looking at, okay, at the moment, there's enough economic uncertainty that people can fill their roles, people leave, there are some skill shortages, but by and large, there are enough people, even if it does mean moving back into cities or wherever. But whether those people are qualitatively different from the ones who are taking advantage of employers of choice who will give them flexibility, and whether that's going to create a difference that we might not see for a decade, this sort of Dead Sea effect where some kinds of traits get more concentrated in one area and some organizations slow down and develop a kind of a lack of flexibility, whereas people who are more likely to flow from one organization to another are the ones who are going to be seeking those who will give them the flexibility they want. And we might not really, because the numbers balance out for now, we're not going to see those effects straight away, and we're not going to see the impact on the workplace. And maybe we'll look back in a decade or so and say, well, it was obvious, we've got these places that are fixed in place and they're going to attract a certain kind of person. And they're completely different from the organizations that can hire from anywhere and have to compete for the best in the world. And I'd be surprised if those organizations don't turn out to be more productive and effective in terms of profitability. At the end of the day, most of these are commercial businesses we're talking about. So at the moment we can't see it. It's kind of obscured by the sheer numbers and by big geopolitical factors that might make people want to quiet quit. We're not going to go back to talking about that, I hope. Or might make them want to stay in a job where they're not 100% happy because they're not sure what's happening long term about their mortgage rate or things like that. But over time, will we see that there is more churn around the work from anywhere environment? But because of that, people who move on more quickly with their career and will climb the ladder faster, and will have younger people in more senior positions, will have possibly the cream of the talent going to those more flexible work from anywhere employers. I don't know.
Or the opposite, that what we get is the people who are going from that the people who want long, stable careers, of which there are many. I mean, I don't understand it, but some people have been in the same organization for 20 years and happy with that they stay with certain kind of organizations. Yeah. And the people who want the flexibility actually have careers in organizations and move on every 3 years.
Yes. And if you actually don't want that, then it makes sense to buy a house near a big employer that wants to keep things local and keep things centralized. And it could definitely become quite divisive, I think. We could have these kind of two universes coexisting, maybe on the same street, maybe.
Yes, well, that's what's interesting as well, is to see what that might do to the cities, to the rural areas. I think I'm quite optimistic that at some point when things settle down, that people will be able to choose the kind of work life they want to have. And there will always be, I mean, I hear of many workaholics that are freelancers, that are writers, that whatever, but there might be people who want to spend all their time in a building doing some kind of work. And there will be people who, to the other extreme, that actually don't want to spend more than 3 months in a country. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how work enables all these lifestyles, as you say, to coexist or not coexist. I don't know.
Yeah. And I'm sure whatever happens, we're going to end up with more plurality and diversity of lifestyle choices from digital nomadism through to migration to commuting from the countryside once a week or something. We're going to have all those variations. I suppose the thing that we don't know yet is whether that will correlate with high performance individuals in a way that some employers might get bitten by.
I'm sure lots of my friends are very high performers. They want 2 days at home and that's it.
Yeah, that's
but I'm a different generation.
Yes, I think that's another thing. Give it another 10, 20 years. We're going to be talking about people who've spent most of their life post-pandemic in the workplace.
Yeah. So all of this from Rabobank's approach to hybrid work. We love this. Listeners, do let us know what you think of this new format. We're going to play with it for a few months, see how it goes. You're very welcome to email us, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. Or if you want to do a shout out on some of the social media like LinkedIn, a bit like Carol Hamilton, who was on LinkedIn and did a little shout out in a post that was talking about asynchronous communication. And she said, Pilar Ortiz and her co-host talk a lot about really integrating asynchronous communication on remote teams on their podcast, 21st Century Work Life. So thank you, Carol.
Yay, thanks, Carol.
Listeners, you're very welcome to spread the word. Before we go, just to say you can sign up to the newsletter, which has monthly listening and reading recommendations. And you can do that over at virtualnotdistant.com on the newsletter page, on the resources. Thanks to Ross, who will polish this episode. You can follow us on LinkedIn. I was going to say follow the page, but it is so quiet. So Pilar Ortiz, I have been your host. Maya Middlemis, any final words to our listeners for today?
No, just to say that I really enjoyed this new format. I love the fact that we started with such an interesting conversation and wound up with a completely different one.
Yes, we are podcast material, perfect podcast material. Well, thank you very much, Maya, and listeners, thank you very much for listening. A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.